Okay, so we're talking about politics today, and I am thinking about especially millennials in politics. And Gen Z in politics. Let me throw out a couple of things for you, and then you try to organize your comments in response, or also feel free to, um, just give me your impressions independently of the things I want to say. Okay, so first thing is, overall, it looks like right now, in terms of, the majority of polls, that Biden is dropping in the polls, and it looks like Trump has the lead. Looks like, if the election was today, Trump would win. So then what are the variables? Well, I think one big variable is that the youth are not that enthralled with Biden. And there is there's the issues with what's happening in Gaza. There's a lot of stuff on TikTok, apparently, about, on behalf of the Palestinian people, that's really affecting people's, how can we be funding this war and so on. I think you see that. Maybe you guys do or don't see that among your friends and so on. So there's that. But then there's also this, big movement among the Republicans, the that's fueled by the Heritage Foundation right now, called Project 2025. If you haven't looked up Project 2025, and I've been hearing from a lot of Gen Z folks that there's a shitload of stuff about it on TikTok, and that the youth are really, up in arms about it, because it's like kind of the plan to dismantle the administrative state, including dismantling, there's hope to get rid of gay marriage. There's hope to eliminate abortion and so on. Hey, Courtney. Okay, so I'm throwing out a few things about where I am hearing the youth and Gen Z are being affected in the political realm. So there's lukewarmness about Biden, but there's also a lot of irritation about Project 2025. I'm
Oh my
interested
God.
if you guys have heard about that and what you think about that. And also, that's the picture in the national realm about politics. But and what's going to happen, then I just want to throw this one thing out there, and you can also, so in my critical thinking class on critical thinking for civic life, um, the the students are this semester pretty disgruntled with democracy, even though we've already established, democracy is flawed, it's broken, it needs, we need to work on trying to fix it. And one kid said he thinks that, it would be better if Trump won, because maybe the whole thing just needs to burn down and we need to start over from scratch. So does anybody want to kick off some comments on politics and Gen Z?
Me.
Okay, go ahead, Courtney.
First of all, I'm so sorry I'm late. Time got away from me.
And Marco said that he's going to be about 15 minutes late, so that's about 10 minutes.
Oh, wonderful. We connected on Instagram, by the way. We haven't said
Cool.
anything to each other, but yes, thank you for that. So first of all, what a privilege to take, but okay, thanks for saying that, whoever did. I think we've talked about this before, that Gen Z is probably like, and we say this about every generation, that they're the most involved in politics. But I think that's just because, like, we're all getting closer and closer to late stage capitalism. We're all feeling it. We're all experiencing that pressure. Why do I have two sets of pronouns?
Wait,
Oh,
Courtney, I mean, I don't know. You have to persuade me that Gen Z is as involved politically as previous generations, because
I'm right there with you, Amber.
I think maybe that's yeah, Lowell, why are you thinking no, maybe not?
Well, I just think back to like the civil
Come
rights
back to
era
you, Courtney.
when like you had like 3 and 4-year-olds marching. Like that doesn't happen the same way now. Like you have a lot of like social media activism, but like back in like the 50s and 60s, or like even before then, when like people were fighting for like black people to be able to vote, or like women to be able to vote, like you had very, very young people doing these things without any social media and like without any of this like fake activism. So like I wouldn't say like we're the most politically involved. I would say maybe like we have different mediums of like being very loud with how
Yeah,
like
that's true.
opinionated we are.
Political
But,
involvement has
like,
definitely changed, right?
right. But like I wouldn't say we're the most like like how many people actually go out and do things beyond just saying what their political ideologies on social media?
And then the question on social media too is how much of the time you're spending on social media is devoted to political work and how much is really just
And even then, like,
culture
are
and
you just reading
consumerism
things, or are you like being a political activist? Like, are you like going out and doing something? Or are you like on message boards, like setting things up to actually happen in the world? Or are you just being like, we need to plant more trees, and then like you go and like scroll on TikTok? Like, come on.
Mhm.
Do you
Okay,
think though that Courtney, like
I'm heading
my
back to Courtney first, Alicia. Hold on. Because I interrupted her to let Lowell in, so I'm going to go to you next, Alicia.
I think firstly, like I sense a lot of judgment from that statement.
Which?
And I also I think that
I sense a
the
lot of
way that
judgment from which statement?
it's like fake activism, because I think we need to consider it a gradient.
So it could
Um,
be it's a different kind of activism rather than
Thank you.
fake. And
So
so
I think that we're coming to an age where we need to redefine what activism is. And I also think that statement doesn't consider the fact that like going out and being an activist has basically, in a very shadow sense, been made illegal. Like there were people that were peaceful protesters during Black Lives Matter that were being shot with sandbags, like sandbags that for some people were causing heart attacks. People died from those sandbags.
okay, so
So
I'm gonna let Alicia in and then I see your hand, Lowell.
I mean, I think that anytime we talk about political activism, it's gonna be judgy and it's gonna be hot and we're gonna have really strong emotions. So I want to declare, like from the jump street, it's an opinion, it's a preference, it's not to offend. But secondary to that, I think that it's like a flip coin, right? Because like one thing Lowell said was like, yeah, well, the civil rights era, there were kids marching, and there wasn't a negation for violence that occurred there, and it wasn't legal. There was still a lot of bloodshed, right? But I do think that there is a different type of activism that I visualize. And I also think that I always say this in every meeting, I feel like it boils down to what you're taught is your definition of activism and how you pursue it in the most changeable way. Because while I am a big advocate for blowing shit up and protesting and getting violent, I'm 100% willing to die for things I believe in. I also know that there's an issue with that if you do something in the name of your cause and it causes more harm for that movement. So I think that there's a lot of people who don't always know how to like do that in a way that's not going to cause harm. And then lastly, I would say, in my opinion, it might not be Gen Z, but I definitely see kids my daughter's age. She's 11. They just did this for Multicultural Day. They were asked, like, what do you want to do to celebrate Multicultural Day? And the students were like, she's in chorus and she's like, we want to sing Raise Up. And we want to, in the background of this, have a video slide of like Malcolm X's Ballot or a Bullet, because the principles that were there during these moments, they were in such a dire desperation of need to act that the death of slowly dying by what was occurring within their community was far worse than going out and getting shot and killed for what they believed in. And I think that that's the line. You have to figure out what are actual things that people cannot live with anymore and how to actively make a change without the lives being such a large cost. But understanding that's a possibility, which is how the civil rights movement kind of made its plight, right? Like they knew getting on that bus, they could be beaten up and killed. They were well aware of that getting on the bus.
Okay, good. I'm gonna go to Lowell and then we'll see if Turner has anything yet, wants to slip in here. Go ahead, Lowell, and then we'll come back to Courtney.
We can't hear you. Lowell, we can't hear you, honey.
I appreciate that. When has any like, or to say a couple things, like one, when has any meaningful forms of protest ever been like non-violent to a certain extent? Like when I think of like apartheid in South Africa, and I'm thinking of like Nelson Mandela, and when I'm thinking of like Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King, and how he had two completely different people, and like how Martin Luther King had all the white people, but the majority of Black people and Muslim people were supporting Malcolm X, and like those were the people who the policies were affecting. So like I think it's very, very tricky when like I completely agree that they are different forms of activism, but in my mind, like they're not comparable when like someone is like tweeting in their room. And then when you have people like Nelson Mandela's "I'm prepared to die," like Gamber, I think about
like they're not going hard enough, right?
Well, like, yeah, and like
yeah, okay.
Authentic enough is what I hear, Lowell, is like you're big on authenticism. Like,
I agree.
I'm saying be authentic. If you're gonna
Like
do
where
your
you
shit,
are,
Well, right, like you
my
had
partner and I
children
talk about
being,
this all
like-
the time. We agree
Yeah.
entirely.
Okay, I'm glad we got through that. We got through that really well. I think we came to an agreement about gradations and authenticity and yeah. And so I'm interested that all of you, and it's probably because you guys are political, are have a high standard for what it means to be politically engaged. And I wonder, like, when you look at the masses of your generation, do you, what percentage of them do you think are politically engaged, and what percentage are just trying to get through school, make ends meet, trying to just pay the bills, and are then needing some downtime and spending their downtime on social media, so really not really as politically engaged as you guys are. And before we get to that one, Turner, any thoughts on any of this?
I think the main thing that jumps out to me is that it just seems that like people, I feel like the internet dilutes political activism, if that makes sense in a way, because it's the place that we're basically being told we have the most influence. A lot of the time we see, maybe other people going, protesting, and it doesn't really work out physically. So people are like, well, I'll share my thoughts online, and it's a little discouraging that in the mass buzz of the internet, everyone's voices eventually get drowned out into this like white noise. And so it feels like maybe, to me, I don't feel like this, like Gen Z is less politically active. I just feel like it's being put in the wrong place. Like all those efforts are being funneled towards a place where there's already so many thoughts that it's just impossible to notice or see or care.
Do you think the people? Oh, we'll go to Alicia.
no, I'm like, I think Lowell, Turner, Courtney, we're all kind of saying the same thing when it comes to like how the internet of it can almost make it seem watered down in a sense, but also to piggyback what you had asked us a minute ago, it's like there's a sense of privilege to a group of people that can be privileged enough to be like, oh, this is too overwhelming, this is too much, versus a group dynamic that's like, there is no time to rest.
There's
and I think
nothing to
it kind of
lose.
gets lost, right? So like Lowell brought up the civil rights, and obviously I'm a big advocate for this for personal reasons, but there was a sense of like, we don't have another fucking choice. Like even with the white moderates, even with the letter from Birmingham, it's like, don't play my friend. Don't pretend we're on the same fucking side, right? And the other side of that is if you're in a sense of a privileged place, right, where you're in Los Angeles and like, yeah, it's dirty and it's grimy, but you can close your blinds, you can get in your Uber, you can order your Postmates, you can avoid it. The possibility exists that you can blind your eye to the actual shit setting fire, right? And I think the student in your class that's like, let this happen so that this revolution can come, because it's not going to happen because people are thinking it's not going to happen. So nobody's fighting, right? But that's also coming from a privileged place. And if you go, I always say to you, like, go to the south of the 405. We're not an anomaly. This weekend alone, there was a group of us advocating for like getting people out to vote and things like that. And that started with my daughter and the kids that get bussed into her school, and then being like, sitting in this nice Brentwood area, you have the privilege of not giving a shit. But like, we go home. And when we go home, we have to make a change. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, really good point, Alicia. Okay, I saw Lowell. Wait, where'd Lowell go? I saw Lowell, and then Courtney.
Yeah, so I think like it's a good to like tie it back to what the student said, right? Just so kind of like a grounding point. Like I completely agree with him, but I think like probably with two different ideas of what we want to rebuild. But like I think it's really, really interesting because like I think back to like the class that we had, Amber, and how like we kind of all agreed that like we want something different. But, like the only way to do it is like through incremental reform, which like might not necessarily do anything meaningful at all. We all kind of agree that like we need to burn it down, but like that's not possible because like we don't have any options right now. Like we all have lives that we have to live. We all have like things that we have to do. We all can't like choose to just burn everything down and go be like living it out in the streets, protesting every single thing that like the US
When
has
you
stamped.
imagine like building it up from scratch, Lowell, what do you imagine? Like
Well, it's so
burning it
tricky
down and
because, like,
replacing
it's not a
constitutional
national
liberal
thing.
democracy with
We
what?
can't just like it has to be a global affair. Like humanity has to come together, which is why I think it's impossible. Because like I think back to like the Marx thing and like how like there's like the national and then there's like a global like destruction of capitalism, and how like it does depend on like the globe getting rid of capitalism for capitalism to like really be
Okay,
going
so
away.
it It would entail
everyone
definitely.
agreeing, which is like why it's so tricky, because like there will always be someone who doesn't agree, and like thus we can't actually get shit done. It's like the 50-50 in class, like that never actually did anything. We had to get like a 60-30 or 60-40, like a 70-30 majority to pass anything.
Unless you have a hot pocket though, right?
Okay, wait, Alicia, Courtney, and then Turner.
First and foremost, hell yeah, yes, I agree fully. I mean, how many times
Turn
have I
it
said that?
down and start from scratch.
Fucking get rid of capitalism. It is harming us, all of us,
isn't our
actively,
government.
every day.
Capitalism, there's a difference between democracy and capitalism, right?
Yes,
And
but
so
I
I
am
think why people
specifically
think
referring
democracy
to
is broken is because they think it's being too influenced by capitalism, right?
I think capitalism is being too heavily influenced by an oligarchy and theocracy. But oh gosh, I had a point that I was gonna make. One thing that I would so one thing that I would love to talk about, so the way that Gen Z is experiencing politics is uniquely different from other generations in the way that it is being even further polarized by gender identity. Like they're doing studies, and I really wish I had it in front of me. I could probably send you a link later, where they're showing that women and men are becoming like diametrically opposed in their value systems, and women are going very blue, even past liberal into progressivism, kind of where I sit, and then men are going into like the alt-right because they're finding support there for what is being defined by masculinity.
Interesting.
So politics in Gen Z is no longer like they're not playing the same game of politics. It isn't civil rights for them. It's not just civil rights. It's like gender warfare. And it's this difference of like traditional gender roles and how they're being politicized and like and it goes really, really well with like identity politics and like this idea that your politics are tied to your very identity. So when they're challenged, you as a person are being challenged. You as a person are being commented on. So the reason we're seeing so much online discourse is also because like they're literally viewing politics through a completely different lens that we have never seen before.
Good job, Courtney. I got that point. Turner, you're up. I like it that you guys are raising your hand because it helped me keep things moving and lower.
It's going fast. Yeah.
I agree with Courtney that there's like a lot of ego involved, and that's what makes it very difficult to start like meaningful, exchanges of information. I feel bad because my point like goes kind of back to what we were talking about before.
No,
but
please do.
The thing I was thinking about the students' argument is saying like, well, we should just let Trump win and burn everything down. And my question is like, if we do let Trump win, are things going to burn down? Because it seems like with this Project 25 thing and all these like modes of control up at higher levels, people are more willing to tolerate terrible circumstances nowadays, it would seem to me, than in the past. Like we were dealing with stuff that 100 years ago, people would be rioting in the streets. But there's like a certain layer of complacency that I'm seeing. There's just like, oh, things just keep getting worse and we're not going to do anything about it. So like, I'm not convinced that if Trump took control, that everything, the US would become like a monarchy,
But do you argue that that's by design? Do you think that's on purpose, or do you think that's a product of what's happening? What are your thoughts on the why?
Just when I think about like the way the government has changed, it seems to me like the original intention of the government was that if it becomes unbalanced or corrupt in any way, then fairly the masses and the people should be able to overthrow them and reinstate a different kind of government. And that's just not
the Declaration of Independence. Okay,
like that is not possible, or it doesn't.
It's also the Convention of States.
Okay, wait, Courtney. I'm gonna move on to Lowell and then Alicia.
Can't hear you.
Okay, two things. One, to Courtney, I agree with you in that, like, because like I have a younger brother who's like a straight alpha bro, and like he's very much found like safety in the right because it like validates everything that he wants like everyone else to say. Like he has like a sounding board who agrees with him. Like he has like so like I have like all lesbian moms, right? And like my mom is like straight out of fucking Mexico, and like my brother doesn't look that. So like he is like, oh, I'm like he's a Bible thumper now. Like he wants to move to like Virginia so he can name like a Joe Jr. Like he wants like his own like little replication of himself. Where I'm just like, what is going on? But then like because we have the internet, he has like this ability that like any place in the world he can find a supporter, right? He can find someone who agrees with him, and then like he has that confirmation bias of like, oh well, like blah 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 blah, Fox News, it's just like another news station, like it's what they're telling me is the truth, and it's just like, okay, it just all goes to shit. But then the other thing, I think Turner said, it was about I don't know, I lost
It
it.
was, you were nodding about when him saying, well, even if Trump does get elected, will everything then
right,
get
right, right,
burned
right.
down?
No, like that was something that I found really interesting. Is the other day I listened to like an interview with Mexico's president, and what he was saying is that him and Trump have always been on great terms, and that like he's never going to build that wall. That's just a policy thing. And like that was really interesting to me. Is like with Trump, it's so true that like everything that he runs on never really gets done because like at the end of the day he's a businessman. At the end of the day he wants to make sure that he has money, and like I think I can't necessarily be sure that like he's gonna become a monarch because like I think that'd be really really hard. He'd have to get like Congress to agree. He'd have to get like this like everyone. But like who knows if he gets like majority whatever. But like I think it's tricky because the people will never revolt the way that they once did because we're like too diverse now, if that makes sense. Like we're too diverse in thought. And like you can walk down the street and you can have like 7 different political groups, 14 different religions from like 20 different countries who all want like different things. And then I think another hard part is that a lot of immigrants don't want like communism. They don't want socialism. They're coming to America for capitalism. I think it's a very, very
That
like
is such a good
privileged
point.
thing. Well,
I
right,
have
because
a
like people like
question for you.
Okay,
yeah.
wait, Courtney, because we got a queue, and I'm going to come to you next. But
Oh, it's for
Alicia,
Lowell. Can I ask Lowell a question, like a follow-up question?
okay, yeah, let's go for that. Yeah.
Like, would you argue that, so earlier we were talking about how the internet is like diluting activism, but along that same vein, aren't we also making the argument that the internet is what is radicalizing people?
No, I think what the internet has done is it's given enough opinion that like anyone can find like safety in like without having to like criticize themselves. Like no one has to like question their own ideas.
Like an
I
echo
wouldn't say
chamber.
it's necessarily like I can listen to Tucker Carlson all day, but I'm not going to get any more radical about the right. You know what I mean? Like I think that's true for a lot of people. But I think what then happens is like then they start like only looking for those things. So like I wouldn't say like it starts off by radicalizing you to like a
So
very
it's like
political ideology, but like
a tool for confirmation bias.
right. Like over time, like that filter bubble will start to exist, and like then you will only see things that agree with you, and then only the ads that you see will agree with you, and then eventually like the internet agrees with you, and then like why are you even questioning things? So like I wouldn't
So
say
we're
that
like, to be righteous is to get the most likes.
yes.
Hi, Marco.
I do agree that we should let people, after they've spoken, have others ask some questions of clarification. I think that's a good policy. So thank you for that, Courtney. Okay, Alicia, you're up.
I think that like it's a couple of things. So like first thing when Lo was talking about like the burning it down and it not being possible, and then I was gonna ask him like, okay, but what about like the hot pocket burning it down? And like it always resonates with me these times where the citizens of a demographic have decided outside of the larger global scale to create their own chaos, right? To bring light to whatever issue it may be. And I don't reference Black Lives Matter because, in my opinion, while it was a great intentional, it diluted itself. What I always do bring up is the Watts riots. The reason I bring up the Watts riots is because once again, it goes back to this ideology that I hold near and dear, which is when you specifically can no longer live with what's being done, and it's almost like being willing to kind of destroy whatever to either bring attention to it. It doesn't mean that when you're doing this act that it's necessarily going to be revolutionary on the global scale, but it may enact some small changes that then like the ripple effect work. And for me personally, I'm a little bit more of a blow the shit up kind of person. I mean, no, I am 100% more, not a little bit, a lot. And there's been a lot of times where like I'm in an area of our city where I almost feel the further I get into SMC, the more I'm around different people, the harder it is for me to explain to them or like be in that room and not get this like feeling inside of me that's like I'm losing myself being on this other side, being in these classrooms, like talking to people who are like, well, we can't do anything, when I'm in a room full of people who are like, we don't have the privilege to not fucking do anything. Like if we've got to burn our own city, then we've got to do something. And so having that like dual life allows me to know that even in this classroom, like when I hear people saying like, yeah, it won't happen or this won't happen. And it's like in my mind, I'm like, but we have the privilege to think that it won't happen because it's not right now sitting on our throat,
Yeah.
right? Versus like when again, like this weekend, I'm, you know, in the Culver City projects, which we were making jokes as we sat there and being like, this is not the fucking projects. Like, what is this? It's like a little town community. And we're laughing because we know what it looks like when we're actually in a space that's so broken down, right? And then having conversations about like, what will we do if this person gets elected? And oh, what can we do now? And talking to our kids. And I think that that radicalization kind of happens within your own economic and cultural group. Because in our group, like my daughter's 11, and I do brag about her in a sense that like she's more politically radicalized and in ways that I wish I had that hubris at 11, right? Because like she'll sit there and like in class, she'll be like, no, we're not doing this. Like, we're going to talk about this problem. And she like brings things in attention and she influences the kids around her. But they're also the kind of kids that have to be aware of what's going around because they don't have the privilege to not know. They don't have money to buy their ignorance. Like, they live with what happens when it trickles down to those neighborhoods.
Okay,
So I
good.
think it's possible.
Yeah. Lowell?
Yeah, I was just gonna say a couple things. Like one that like I completely agree with the burn it down as like kind of like a last resort, like, hey, like you're stepping on our throats. But then I also think about like that being the only time that anything meaningful happens. Like I think of like Stonewall, right? Like people were ready to die. No one did, but like people did get hurt. You know what I mean? But people were ready to for a lot more to happen. But then I think like a lot more recently, like with Haiti, or like with people in like Gaza, like a lot of different political things that who knows what side you're on, but like regardless, people are saying enough is enough, or like they're fighting, they're retaliating. And I think that in my mind, I've just seen too much, like living in LA my whole life, especially going to private school my whole life. I've seen a lot of privileged people just talk out their ass about politics and then like go vote a different way or then go donate to a different person. And like, I think I'm just kind of over it because our generation feels very, very entitled that like, oh, everyone's going to listen to me when I post on the internet when like you have 100 followers. Like no one cares what you're saying. Can you realize that? Like you have no platform to use the internet. Don't pretend like you do. Like, sorry, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think I hear that you're
Okay.
like, you,
Oh,
well,
are you asking
I'm asking Lowell a question. Yeah. So Lowell, from your perspective, I'm assuming you've read the letter to Birmingham, and you know when Martin Luther King talks about like the white moderates, I feel like that's what you're saying about your generation. I just want to make sure I'm understanding, like that they talk one way, and then the moment it comes to action, they're like, "Oh nope, I don't want to get blood on my shoes," kind of energy.
But isn't there
Very
even
much
within the
that.
generation? Isn't there even within the generation? There's the privileged youth, and then there's the youth that are, you know,
100%. But I think it's very interesting in that it's starting to change because like a lot of our generation cannot find like affordable housing or good jobs, regardless of like how good your parents are. Like unless your parents are like worth tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, they can't really do much anymore because like what they're going to pay the $4,000 for the studio apartment, which like I know it's not, but just to exaggerate.
Okay, Courtney.
I think that's such a strong point. And like, I think to maybe just counter one point that you made about like small followings, like, I mean, okay, so I have no following. Okay, I've got like the most pathetic and measly like interactions with people.
It might be a
But that
virtue.
also means that a larger percentage of the people that follow me are seeing my info. That also means that when people are like, yo, you just posted something crazy, can you please tell me what the fuck you were talking about? And I'm like, let me tell you. And then I tell them that, hey, 600, 700 laws against like queer folks and trans folks have been passed in the last year. Let's fucking talk about it. So like those interactions, they happen on a more one-to-one basis and they do become more personal the smaller your following is. So that's something to be said, right? Because like when your following is small, it's people that you probably actually interact with, people you talk to, people that you know. But another thing that I really wanted to bring up is like, there's kind of a duality to like this idea of anarchism and like, well, I could bring up three topics of that. So like one, what are the odds of anarchy being a stable state? Because it's not. Like there will always be a ruler that pops up. That's just humanity. Like that's how we operate. Secondly, who are the first people to be harmed when major structures get collapsed? And it's going to be people of color. It's going to be poor people. It's going to be like queer people. It's going to be every single person in this room. Like we're the first to go. So like there's just a piece of me that really like there's like a duality to the privilege of anarchy and to be able to entertain it, because while these structures hurt us, they're also unfortunately like maintaining a status quo means that we're not under somebody's active boot and en masse. Like, and that's not to say that I don't want to burn it down, because I really want to burn it down.
No, I have a question, Courtney, though, because like I'm wondering if when you say like there'll always be a role, I don't think that, at least in my case, when I say burn it down, I don't think there's this idea of like I want to live within an anarchy state. I think the message that maybe even that student is saying is like he followed it up with and then build it from the fucking ground, right? So like we're not saying don't have democracy, because that often gets lost in my translation. But my question would be like in a utopia, right? Plato's fucking book, we created a society. In essence, there hasn't been any society that I'm aware of that came from like us doing the right thing all the time and not burning shit down. Like, I think there's always been like a bomb and then burning it down. And like going back to like the Palestinian situation, at the very beginning of this fight, right, everybody was like, oh my God, they did hostages. And then the more information that came out by the burning shit down, people were like, wait a minute, this is fuckery on a grand scale. And now we can see it. So I'm just wondering, do you think there's that possibility though of like, yeah, following up with like, nobody wants an anarchy state. Nobody wants like Robin Hood situations. However, could we possibly burn it down and then rebuild with the intent of electing officials or feeling like we're being heard or things like that? I'm just wondering if that's like the end goal.
That is that. So for me, and I will say it until my like ears turn blue, I fully support the idea of a democratic socialist state. And I know that that's a wild concept for many people, and I know that that's considered very radical, but for me, that's what that would look like. Like that to me is a democracy for people by people, because it benefits people and not
Yeah,
a
so you're
small
making a
group of
distinction
power.
between liberal democracy, which is very consistent with capitalism and individualism, and socialist democracy,
Collectivism.
which is collectivism, and that the corporations would be controlled by the government in the service of the people. Is that right?
Yeah, and my fear is always going to be this, also from a social worker perspective, is unfortunately like the concept of cracking a few eggs happens in those kinds of revolutions, and unfortunately it's the more metaphors, the low-hanging fruit, and like
Yeah,
I think
are the loudest.
Who's going to be hurt if we have
that's my concern, is like exactly
yeah.
what does that
Well,
look like
up.
for one of the strongest militaries in the world?
Lowell's been really patient, so let's let him in, and then we're going to
Apologies.
Marco has any thoughts on what he's heard since he joined us.
Yeah, no worries. So I think two things. One, like Courtney, you're completely right in that, like, yes, the less of a following you have, the more one-to-one interactions you have. But I guess like my question is like, there can't really be like a study done on like everyone with 50 followers, how many people go out and vote different. You know what I mean? Like you can have these conversations all day, but like what actually happens. But I think the difference with like people with then larger followings or people with like a platform is that like people then actually go do something different, right? Like when someone like as awful as they are, like the Hadid say something about Palestine, people go
Taylor Swift even.
Right, 1000%. Like people go do something. So I think my issue is not with like the people who have 50 followers and are like, hey, this is what's happening, then having those discussions. It's more with us thinking that that's activism and that that's any way going to change anything on a grand enough scale that we're going to like burn all this shit down. Like
that goes back to that gradation though. That is activism.
But like,
having conversations and changing minds.
Are we all going to be dead by the time that change happens?
Ways.
Like, am I going to be?
I mean, I agree with Lowell. I'm on Lowell's team right now, solely on the principle of the fact that like he's just fucking fed up. Like he's fed up.
Like if I'm gonna be 95 and on my deathbed by the
time. We're just saying there are multiple facets to activism.
No, and I'm with you, but I think like when the passion behind Lowell's interaction is I understand like the frustration of being like, if you're on this grand scale and you're encouraging or you're tweeting or you're like just mindlessly doing this shit, if you're not following up, then again, we're all going to be 80 and the world's going to be shit. And it's like, what was the point of the conversation, right? I think
I
that
wholeheartedly agree. Like,
Yeah.
Okay,
that's
yeah, that's
literally
true.
the reason I'm in school right now is because I'm like, fuck, there's so much to do. I'm
think that,
intimidated by the topic.
the
Where do I start? Please
incremental
teach me where to
reform
start.
doesn't work, right? Like that's what we've
I
kind of
agree.
agreed upon in this
I
room, is
mean,
that
it
like,
depends on what you mean by incremental
well, just
reform,
like
because
if we change something, like if every day we allow, like we change the zone that much, like zoning laws, and like that much changes, then like eventually something will
Top-down
happen.
politics
Well, it
doesn't work.
depends.
It
I
needs
mean,
to be bottom up.
Well, it depends on how big your scale of time is, right? Because like
Well, right, I'm saying like within
76,
my
you have-
lifetime, I want people to have rights. So like I don't want to be dead by then. So like I
right.
don't
I
really
mean,
care
it
about
took
like the universe's
took a
timeline.
100
I
years
care about when
to
I die.
abolish slavery, and then another 100 years, you know, to
But we also have the for-profit
I'm
prison
planning on
system.
living to
So
like
did we
90
really?
something. Like I need to see something happen.
So Amber, do you think, because you're obviously you're a little bit old, like I feel like I'm closer in your age than a lot of other people in this room, but my question for you would be this: do you think that when you say like 100 years for slavery, right? Do you think that because you've watched the lineage and you're well aware of like the time frame it's taken to occur change, that there's a part of you that maybe holds on to the idea that that's the speed in which it needs to happen, like we need
no,
to be,
not that it needs to happen,
or
that
that
it
it's
does
going to
happen. Right.
right?
I mean, okay, I'm going to pause here for a second and let Marco in. I see Turner wants to get in too. Marco, do you have anything or no?
I mean, you can prioritize Turner. I feel
Turner,
like
okay, you hop in, Turner.
Right. I just have such a quick thought, which is just that it seems to me that the internet and like all of culture is speeding up Gen Z very much, and we want to see like immediate change. So while those in the older generations can accept the fact that change takes time, I would say that we've kind of lost that trust that it will continue to happen slowly over time, and we need to start seeing things happening now.
What a
you
what a
know?
good point, Turner. And I'll just comment there on because I kind of want to follow up on what Alicia was asking me. So when I was in college at the University of Illinois in the early 1980s, I was a radical lesbian separatist who wanted to overthrow patriarchy. And I was like engaging in the weekends on like doing things like, you know, borderline illegal property damage kinds of, you know, we were doing kind of naughty things, but not anything that was like, you know, super illegal. A lot of graffiti, and so and what I saw was that in order for change to happen in, you know, like that, like the ERA did not pass. Like the radicals of the women's movement of the 1970s were like burn it down, burn patriarchy down, and it did not lead to the kinds of change. So I am 100% impatient with the rate of change. I think, you know, the issues that we're seeing with regard to gender are really a product of an unfinished project, in the same way as the civil rights project is an unfinished project. And so I'm not, but I do feel very concerned about saying, well, if Trump wins, then we'll just have a you know, a civil war and we'll burn it all down and we'll start from scratch, because I do not believe, given what I see happening in the world with the movement towards totalitarianism and the demagogues that are leading us there, that what we would build up would be better than what we have right now. And so
Right,
That
and I
was
think that's
that was
why I
on
was
my mind earlier.
okay, so I see Courtney, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
So I kind of feel like in some ways this might tie into what Turner said and you said, but like, what do you think of this idea that we've been approaching activism from like a top-down approach? And Marco in some ways kind of alluded to this when we brought up how he feels about trans rights, right? Like you were like, I don't know, this is a really new subject. And I think this also ties well into this idea of like white lady feminism, which also kind of touches on what you were talking about, Amber. And like maybe the issue and the reason we want to burn shit down is that we have never seen activism actually start with the root of the fucking problem. It's always like, let's give the rights to the people that are the most privileged because that's going to be the easiest to do first.
No, that's not why it's because it's the easiest. It's because
and
those with
supremacy,
power
there's
have the
multiple
ability to make the
hierarchies.
changes on
Yeah.
their own behalf. Yeah, but yeah,
But
that's the
it's
way.
this notion that
But
it
I
will
don't
be
consider that
accepted.
incrementalism. I consider that like maintaining the status quo. I mean, it depends on what you mean by incrementalism. Like revolution and war and violence are one way to change things, but things do get changed. Okay, so Alicia and then Lowell.
I mean, I'm gonna piggyback off of Turner. I have 2 points. One, Turner, I agree. There's a level of instant gratification we desperately want because of how fast things happen around us, how frequently we, get that screen time. The other thing is the reason I asked that is because I'm in 52 with this really old professor. He's at SMC. He's super dope. But when we talk in his class, because I meet in his office hours, and it's like a really funny name. It starts with a K. If you ever want to take 50 politically, yes, perfect. What I like about talking to him is he goes through his stages, right? When he was our age or my age, which I'm 39, he talks about how revolutionary and the passion he had and like this ideology he was running with. And then as he's gotten older, he talks about how he's had to learn the steps in which things operate a little bit more and the speed in which they will actually occur on a grand scale versus a smaller scale. And it made me think of what you were saying, Amber, about like who you were then, right? In the 80s when you were active in college, which is roughly the age frame I'm assuming most of the students in this room are, in the like 20s and the early, where there's like a fire lit within you that's ready to move, right? And then as we progressively get older, one thing I say about myself all the time is I am far more cautious today as a mom of a child and like a grown-up than I was at 19, right? So like even when the George Floyd thing happens, like my logic upon like protesting was they're shooting shit into the crowd. My daughter's gonna stay home. One of her parents gets to go and the other one has to take a seat because one of us has to be here to continue the revolution, right? And I do think for like this group, like Lowell's passion, like the passion we've all had for prominent issues, comes a little bit from the hubris we have of our age as well, our need for speed, our want for change, and also wanting it to happen in our lifetime, but also the again goes back to privilege we have of being like, but I have this longevity, right? So like if I want to fight fire today, I've still got 20 years to like water it down versus looking at it from a perspective of like, I'm 39, I have an 11-year-old kid, I gotta fucking make it home tonight. As much as I want to burn this down, how can I burn it down in a feasible way? And so I think that might shift the paradigm of the conversation too, is to take into account like each stage we are each in our lives at the age we are now with the privilege we have now. And then figuring out what we can do or how we can recruit people to be active in a way that will continue as we age with our activism, if that makes any sense.
Really good, really thoughtful. Lowell? Wait.
Can't hear you, Lowell. Lowell, still can't hear you, baby.
I always do this. I want to say like not to like dissuade from like how meaningful it is to like leave a kid and like a parent at home, but like a lot of people that is like not a privilege they even have, right? Like a lot of people take their kids to go protest with both parents.
100%.
Like it's just very, very tricky because like once again, it's this gradient that Courtney mentions. It's like how much are you willing to do? Like how much does it actually affect you? And I think that's kind of like where it lies with me is like in the perfect world, everyone gets like a 1 out of 10 rating of how much you actually care about this. And like if it's under 6, then like shut up. Like why are you talking? But like if you're actually going out and doing something and like you care and you're actually showing up for that issue and like I'm not saying you have to go bring your kid to like riots or anything, but like people do it. You know what I mean? It's a thing that has happened and has affected change, right? Like there are pictures of children marching, 4 years old. And
Let
like,
me ask you this, Lowell.
yeah.
Do you think like, I mean, like, so there's trade-offs. Like, do you think getting an education is a worthwhile use of your time towards making change? Would you count that as like doing
Well, like
something?
it was so interesting because today I read something by Bell Hooks on like cultural I forget what the name was, but it was about like representation in media. And like what she was talking about is that how like it was a movie that she did, like a 2-part movie.
Yeah,
and I
did
read
you get assigned that in Tvildren's class?
Yes, I did.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
talked about you a few times, fun fact.
Oh, that's great.
All good things, all good things.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just so interesting because like that makes me think about it. Like 1000% people have to be taught how to think critically. People have to be taught how to question things. Like you have to be taught the basics. Like you have to be taught how to walk before you can run, right? But like regardless, don't say something if you're not going to go do it.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to you in a second, Courtney, but do you think that you could be more effective as an activist with a college degree?
Yeah,
than you could
1,000%. I think
Okay.
not to say that someone without a college degree couldn't affect change more than someone with it, but I think if everyone had a college degree, we would all be like a lot better at being an activist, and we'd all have a lot more like understanding
Or
of
would
what
there
it.
just be a lot more corporate executives and people working for the man?
Well, not necessarily, because like I
Direction.
don't think like if my mom had your class, she would have gone like big law. Like, you know what I mean? Like, who knows? Like, I think like at a ground level, like this is affecting change, right? Like you're not tweeting, you're like having a class where you're making people go do stuff. And like
Yeah.
it's different.
Well, and Lowell too, I agree with Lowell on the college degree, because like one of the things that I noticed this weekend was like when they were asking questions about, okay, Alicia, like, so what the fuck do we do? I was like, well, I learned this in this philosophy 2 class, 52 class, where this is this law and like we can write this. But those are things that I didn't know prior to being a student, right? Like I knew how to blow shit up, but I didn't know the right channels and like where to effectively get that chain. And if I was going to bomb a car, it needed to be at the top, not the bottom, and not the one that I could get to the fastest, right? So like that's part of what you learn in school is even if you're radical, you learn the channels really quick, because I have to leave at 2:00 to go sell bags at my kid's school. Marco, I made a blue bag that's like a backpack, and I wasn't sure because you didn't have a color. And if
Oh
you
my
wanted,
God, that's so queer.
Stop. Wait, Alicia, literally this backpack just fucking broke. Like the zipper just busted. It's like essentially the same thing, but
one
not.
like this, that's a square shaped one.
Oh,
Have
You see how adorable this moment is?
this is so cute. That first one is
Um,
beautiful.
I will probably
Oh
send
my
it
god, I can't, I
to
can't.
get
And
to
to Clumpy
Andrew.
to give it to me and I'll give it to
Pass it
Marco.
through.
Oh, stop. I should see
From,
Clumpy too, actually, but
because I'm getting ready to go. My final thought is I do think that there is a sense of privilege, and like I love that Lowell was right. Like I had the privilege of telling her other parent like stay home. I've also like not in certain neighborhoods before we were able to move. It was happening around me. And so like when a gun was pulled on my daughter, I had a definitive moment of like, do I fire back and possibly both of us die, or do I drive out of this situation and then get my kid as far away as possible? But I do think that it's important, and this is why I love Amber. Amber finds students like me, right, that aren't like a lot of you in this room, that have no sense of privilege, that stole and robbed and shot and sold women, like has this level of different griminess, and she reaches us. And then she instills in us this hope that we have, that we can actually do something more than what we were used to with the tools in our toolbox. And because of that light she lit in me, I continued school. And because I continued school, now I go back to where I'm from, and I'm able to educate them on a path that can provide them the tools to fix the shit that's broken beyond what we knew, which was just how to be violent and how to be heard once we were on fire, right? And I think that's the importance, right? Is like what we're doing in this room, like Lowell, like Courtney has said, like Marcos has even said, is just our conversations make us go out into the world and feed those conversations. So I do
You're
want to
so
thank
sweet,
you.
Alicia, but I think we actually chose each other because you showed up for me as much as I showed up for you. And I think that's when the learning is really, so valuable, is when the teacher and the student come together. And even in this setting where you guys actually are taking on the role of teaching me stuff and getting me to think differently, instead of me feeling like my job is to teach you. So anyway, Alicia, it's so great to have you with us today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. To have a good,
I'll send the bag with Marcos. And if anybody else wants one, I'm making them. Feel free to send them out.
thank you
Okay,
so much,
great.
Alicia. We love
Great
you.
to see you, Alicia.
Love you guys.
Okay, Courtney, you're up.
How do I even follow that?
Don't.
I can't even try. I love that we're getting on the topic of how education is going to impact our ability as activists. And for me, that was the entire reason I went to school, because I got tired of being chronically online. I got tired of having to do the online discourse, and I was really overwhelmed Like, where do you even begin? And like, when a system is as complex as the United States is, where do you start? And for me, that was like, okay, maybe going to school is like a good way to do it. And I learned about macro work and like how there's a new form of social work where people can actually influence policymakers. And I was like, holy shit, that's my fucking calling. Like, that's what I want to do is like fuck up the system from the inside. That is what I want.
Right on, Courtney.
I have a
Lowell?
question for you, Courtney. Do you view that as any different than lobbying?
I think that doesn't lobbying for the most part be like, isn't that funding
Yeah, shit,
lawmakers?
SMC, like you pay like a $15 or $20 like fee to SMC to like become a student, or you can also opt out of it. But that then sends lobbyists from SMC to the city to then like lobby on our behalf for then like more funding. So it's like very tricky because like
could
lobbying
be.
is not necessarily bad, but it's just like how is that any different?
So the way that it's really, really new, and from my understanding of it, and again, this is why I'm in school, and I'm probably not going to learn in depth what this is until I'm in my graduate program. So that's like a master's, and that's years away. But based off of my limited knowledge, it's actually like official positions within offices of politicians. So like, think of them as like almost Jiminy Crickets. I know it's a fucking joke, but like as far as like I like to think of it, it basically because like this is an entire community of people that's completely out of touch with the everyday lives of people, with the mass impact that it's going to have on people. And if I can influence elections and if I can buzz in the right person's ear about policy, that to me sounds just as powerful as me standing in the streets with a sign in my hand.
Yeah, okay, let's talk a little bit about that. So
I think it's tricky.
with regard to the upcoming election, do you feel like you will take an active role in the upcoming election for the president? And who will you
No.
vote and who will you vote for? And will you vote or will you choose not to vote?
Honestly, I'm like I'm up to here. Like I'm not sleeping because of this election, if I'm being honest. Like I've got a trans partner. We want to get married. I don't know if we can get married like after the election. We don't know if we want to stay in the US. Of course we're going to vote. No, I have no hand in the election whatsoever. But like
I mean, doesn't the fact that Project 2025 wants to like, overrule
there also is a mass
gay marriage
conversation
decision by the
about
Supreme Court?
yes,
Doesn't that make you want to vote for Biden?
I don't like Biden because of Palestine, but I will unfortunately be voting for him.
That's what I'm
30,000.
wondering. Do you think that's
30,000 people dead, and I'm
characteristic
still
of your
voting for him.
generation, or
I
do
think
you
that I think that
think
has to
that-
happen.
Go ahead,
That about
Turner.
sums it up.
Lowell?
No, Turner, you go first.
Well, I was just gonna say that Courtney's statement about sums it up because Biden is like very non-sympathetic. People are like,
He's
you
still
know,
a fascist.
he's a
Yeah.
walking corpse, that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
so it's very hard to feel like enthusiastic about voting for him. And I think a lot of us still are, but also at the same time, like it's easy to understand why a bunch of people are like, oh, I'm just not gonna vote. And then,
You know, I think another thing we need
Not
to talk
voting
about
is
is
definitely a vote for Trump.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh
Oh,
yes,
right.
Yes.
absolutely, absolutely. But you can see how some
Yeah.
people
I get
just-
it.
yeah.
we need to have a conversation about how Gen Z and like my age of millennials, we have never, not once, even with Hillary Clinton, had someone to vote for in the presidency that we were excited to vote for. It was always a lesser of two evils. We've never, ever
Mhm.
had a candidate in our lifetime that was worthy of excitement. And that's why they're chronically online because they
You
have no
guys-
idea what
you guys-
politics.
Were you
They
not
have no idea what
excited
it looks
about
like.
Obama in the beginning?
I
I was,
wasn't
like,
old enough.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
oh my
for
God.
every
you're
single
old.
election, I've been voting to keep Trump out of the office. Like, let
Uh-huh.
that set in for a
Yeah,
second.
that's like what your whole reality. It's so weird. That's your whole reality. I mean, of course, demagoguery. It just seems like politics is demagoguery if that's all you've ever
It's all
really
we know.
experienced. Yeah.
But it's so tricky
Exactly.
because like it's all we know experientially. Because then I think back to like how like well yes Reagan fucked everything up, but like who's the good one? I forget his name. FDR. How he like created all these like very, very progressive deals and
That
everything.
was so long ago.
well,
I'm
well,
so glad you
100%,
know
but like,
that, Lowell. That's
well,
so cool that
it
you
is
know
so
that.
long ago. Well, Amber, I have these conversations with my mom daily. She's like the
But I
biggest
so
expert.
agree with you. Like, fuck
But-
yes, FDR.
Well, right, like he had all these like
Ugh.
very progressive measures by like today's standards, even. But like,
Oh
I
my
think it's just
God.
so
What
tricky
about
because
Theodore
like
Roosevelt too? She was insane. I loved
it was
her.
we have. I think it's so tricky. Like everyone today is such like they have to be backed by money. Like you have to have money to even run. Like you can't put ads out if you aren't backed by investors yourself or like
Yeah,
a
no,
company.
capitalism has captured
Right.
democracy.
So like
Capital.
I think in that sense, like our generation's like, yeah, we're just gonna fuck it, but like we're not gonna vote for anyone. But it's so tricky because like a vote for no one is a vote for Trump. And like as much as I hate Biden and like do not stand for a single thing that Biden stands for, like you have to vote for Biden, otherwise we get Trump as president. Like there's no
See,
like
Does look likely.
enlightened that's what people who understand the situation are saying, but there's a ton of
Right.
people who just aren't willing to put in the work and are just not going to
so
vote.
Yes.
it just seems
And
like so
Don't
the
even
third
understand the
party,
situation.
the idea of a third party is like so, what is the word that it's alluring, right? Like,
It's
oh my God,
alluring.
what if
It's
we
attractive.
can step away from the two-party
Seductive.
system? What if we don't have to choose? And like for people that have only had to choose the lesser of two evils, it's really hard to convince them that someone that just murdered 30,000 people is worthy of the presidency.
yeah, but is
See,
Trump anything?
Let's see.
No,
That's
he's
our
far
issue.
worse.
Well, right.
Exactly. But
Like
we know that. That's
and the
not
other
the
issue is
argument.
like there's this whole ageism thing. Like Biden is only like 4 years older than Trump or something. Like he's not that much older.
And
Like
he
there's like
looks
this
like
whole
the
he's the
gift
walking
giver.
corpse. It's like so is Trump. Like
Yeah.
Trump's not any older.
Mhm.
Tanner will do that. It's insane.
Hey,
You
Marco,
can look
I'm
like a
wondering what
Cheeto
you're
or
thinking.
like a skeleton.
Marco?
Yeah. I don't even know what I'm thinking. It's just I think I mean on this subject in particular, I just know so many intelligent like some of my smartest friends are probably not going to vote. And it's
Oh.
like an ongoing conversation we've been having for years like through the Trump presidency because I think like, kind of looping back to some of what Alicia was saying too, it's like there's like this weird impulse that's like misinformed and, obviously not really very pragmatic, but like where I think people kind of want to fast track whatever is bound to happen because it just feels like, like there's not going to be progress with Biden if we get him instead of Trump. I honestly, I wonder if that's realistic based on where everyone's at in the country. And then like I think part of what we've missed too, at least for me, something that I think has informed like my like sense of scale when it comes to activism is just that like maybe the best earliest opportunities I had to like frame myself as an activist revolved around like environmentalism. So like there was an inherent sense of urgency in our framework, which I think is true a lot for a lot of like especially like young white leftists because like I was raised in contexts where there was not urgency around
That's
race and
so
then we
true.
were too young to conceptualize the extent of like gender and sexuality related whatever. So like for me it's like I'm like it seems like I'm gonna get fucked one way or another when this all pans out, or at least I'm one of the candidates that would. And at the same time we have like all this capitalist greed essentially like eroding the planet and like looming wars with like more advanced technologies. So like some of my smartest friends are kind of just like, yeah, I mean, it seems like we're going in a bad direction either way. So like preserving a degraded form of democracy in the meantime isn't what they're interested in, which is like so bleak and nihilistic, but it's hard to like I don't know how to weasel out of that. Like I can't even and especially, when talking to Californians, they're like, well, for the meantime, we're gonna be fine. So, and I think part of the reason why I'm able to shirk that mindset too is because like I grew up in Texas. So like I know people who will be much more immediately affected. So I don't know, it's just but that's something I struggle to argue against.
Like, how do you respond to folks that are just saying like, what's the point in voting? It's all bad.
Or not even that, like it's like what's the true utility in like extending what seems like an inevitable degradation of democracy like
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's the point.
Which
You
circles right
missed
back
that.
around to the students' argument from the
Yeah,
beginning.
I brought that up at the very beginning of class that a student in my class said, look, I don't want Trump to win, but maybe, if he does, it'll lead to a backlash against him,
Yeah.
and everything will get burned down and we can start over from scratch.
Except he's viewing Trump through a lens of, again, anarchy versus the lens of conservatism, where he's
No, I think
literally
he's
going
I
back
think
to
he's viewing
fundamentalism.
I think he's viewing Trump as a would-be dictator. And I think he has in
As
mind,
like a blow it up.
and I think he has in mind what you're saying, something like a socialist democracy, not anarchy. But
That's the positioning of most of my friends, I think, who are honestly like much more politically informed than I am. And like I can't really argue against that. Because also like it feels very immediately urgent for me now, like seeing my privilege
agree.
decline. Like it's so many interesting parallels timing wise, but yeah, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how to argue against that.
so capitalism, its form of democracy is liberal democracy, where you have your individual freedoms are protected and your freedom to participate in the market. And so what you're saying is you see among your generation a recognition that that is a dead end with regard to inequalities, environment. What we need is a democracy in which the people can actually have some protection from capitalism and from the pursuit of profit. Is that right?
Yeah, like almost every young leftist I know is in that camp, which is probably, reflective of a bubble I'm in. But like, there aren't very many moderate leftists. Like,
So
nobody.
is there a third party candidate that people point to with that regard for this election?
I don't even think so. Because also, like, because those people are usually more informed, they know that's sort of a hopeless pursuit.
Aren't
at
the,
least
I think that's
like
the Bernie camp, right, has turned into that contingent, right?
Yeah.
aren't the two like third party candidates like closer to libertarian? Like
Yeah.
the people that like we don't even have one.
Right.
Cornell is West. I mean,
Cornel West.
he's
Oh my
an
gosh, I
kind of a
completely forgot about
utopian
him.
pick, but people are saying a vote for any third party candidate is a vote for the opposition.
It's too high stakes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because to me it seems like on the one hand, Gen Z and the youth generations are critical of capitalism, and yet on the other hand, it seems like there's a big investment in the conception of success around platforms and followers and being able to monetize your private resources. It seems like there's a real kind of protection or love of capitalism. It seems like there's a bifurcation in those politics. Am I right? Go ahead, Courtney.
I feel like this goes back to what you love to talk about is cognitive dissonance, right? Like I can't name a single person that isn't guilty of it to a degree, but
I
we
mean, we
also
all are.
right, and we're also kind of it ties back to what we were talking about last time we were here when we discussed capitalism and how our identity, we are what we buy. And that the problem with capitalism and the reason why we want it taken down is because it seeps into every single corner of your existence, of every person's existence. Like there is no part of our society that is not touched by capitalism. Like
Everything's for sale.
everything is for sale, and I literally mean everything has a cost. And I think and we're gonna see it even more with Gen Alpha than we already do
But
with Gen
isn't
Z.
there just this like desire to be a billionaire that's like, I mean, when I ask my classes,
I feel like it's not
what do you
that way
want to be
anymore.
if you could be anything when you grow up? Like nobody says,
Billionaire.
Martin Luther King or a leader, or they say a billionaire.
You know, I think that's also an age thing. Like we've got movements like cottagecore where people literally just want to like live within their means. That answer is gonna change depending on who you talk to.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
I think that it's like when you're a little kid and you're like, I want to be a celebrity. And then you realize that, hey, this person just got blasted on the front page for picking their nose. Like, then you're like, okay, maybe this isn't so great. So the idea of like being a billionaire is like more money, more problems. And that comes with the more you know about society, that comes with getting older, that comes with age, that comes with education. So like that very specific response is shaped by a multitude of things that are going to be individual to the person.
Yeah. Okay, Lowell, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that like I think with everyone wanting to be a billionaire, I think it does go back to like wanting to just be like financially secure and like just wanting to like have like your own life and being able to like have fun, because like as much as people want to be like money doesn't buy you happiness, like that's bullshit. Like only rich people say that. Like if you have no house, no food, you can't drive anywhere, like you're sad. So like yes, the physical money doesn't do anything. But
Yes.
like
Thank you
being
for
a
bringing that up.
billionaire means like taking care of your family. It means having fun every day. It means X, Y, and Z. But like what a lot of people don't realize is that like being a billionaire only like perpetuates everything that we like want to change right now. Like it just
They just see it as the fix-all,
right.
right?
They see
Like,
it as like just like instant gratification, which it is.
exactly.
Right? Like if you have billions of dollars, everything's instant gratification. So like
Yeah.
who doesn't want that? I think it's hard, but like what you don't
I
want,
think
what you don't want the repercussions of billionaires.
exactly. I feel like the conversation is not so much, do you want to be a billionaire to have money? It's, I want to be a billionaire to have a life that's worth living. So like that also kind of ties in with what I was saying about cottagecore is like, it's not about the money, and it's not because money doesn't buy happiness, because it fucking does, because everything is for sale. However, it's about having the money to lead a life that is valuable and actually worth living, because working for 8 to 12 hours a day and barely being able to afford rent is not a life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I wanted to ask you another political question. One of the things that some people in my generation are saying is that the right is strategically generating propaganda campaigns against the woke, anti-wokeness campaigns to divert attention away from the ways in which they want to move to dismantle the administrative state. That
Yes.
these kind of popular social issues are the way to get the folks that follow the right to vote, that are like worried about family and values and traditions, and they're mobilizing them around campaigns that are aimed at school boards to eliminate LGBTQ, books in the library, and that really those are not the things that we necessarily need to be worried most about, because if the administrative state is dismantled, the oligarchy, the plutocracy will be so full blown that the rich will be really reduce everyone to a measure of
This
squalor.
is
Yeah. So
this
any
is a
thoughts on this?
this is a really common conversation within social work circles, and it's kind of like the idea of how it started with like Reaganomics, and how it started with raising the cost of tuition, which is also what happened during Reagan's time.
Yep.
And like
Deregulating
honestly, yeah,
and
all roads
privatizing
lead back to
education.
Reagan. And
Yep.
what's happening right now has been 50, 60 years in the works, and like we're barely seeing the result of years, decades of laws and lobbying and conversations behind closed doors. And something I was learning in one of my sociology classes was what we see as politics is just for show. Politics is the shaken hands behind closed doors and the conversations we will never hear. That's politics, which is why I want to do macro work, because that's what it is.
I think it's also
And
capital. To
it
add
is
on.
capitalism.
They go
Yes.
hand in hand.
Capitalism, white supremacy, and that bullshit are like the peanut butter and jelly to our democracy right now. So
What do you think about the movement that is identified as woke? I know the term woke is like kind of
it's been
passe now in the
weaponized and
left.
co-opted. Yeah,
been
I think
like
it's
co-opted.
similar to
it was from
feminism.
Black
Similar to
communities.
feminism. People are like how people use feminism as like an epithet, like, oh, you're a feminist. It's like,
And that
okay,
goes back to
that means
gender politics and being diametrically opposed. It's this idea that we are losing the ability to coexist, even from like a sex stance. Like I was listening to like the most wild podcasts where they were like, what does the future look like where Gen Z is politically opposed, not wanting to get married, not wanting to have children, not wanting to interact with the other sex, and having to work together. Like, what does a world like that look
Also,
like when half of the population doesn't want to interact?
Yeah, what is your vision of a positive future? Like, what would be the best possible future you can imagine given where we are right now? I mean, uh, assuming that we're not going to have a utopia and perhaps we're not going to have a dystopia, let's say it doesn't go to dictatorship. What would be the best possible future that you imagine? Do you imagine
what
yourself
scale,
as engaged in political work?
what scale?
I
Like,
think that it's always going to matter.
What scale?
Go
I
ahead,
don't
Will.
understand the question. What scale?
well, like, are we talking about like nationally? What do I want to see, or like, are we
Like, I
talking
mean,
about
I guess like link yourself to your
like?
vision of the
What's
future.
your
What would you
utopia?
be doing in the future if it
But
was a good
I
future?
think my version of utopia is a world in like which everyone is able to create like their own space to live in without like necessarily infringing on anyone else, and
Like
not in like a
lumberjack?
rights way, not in like a rights way, but like I think that like if no one wants to contribute to society, they can 100% go out into the forest and like build a hut and like do whatever the fuck they want and like just be done. Like I
Aren't they
think
already
like,
doing that though?
no, because like you can't go on federal land. Like where can you go to like build your own, like make your own place? Like everywhere, like you have to be a citizen of somewhere. You have to be like, you have to pay taxes. You have to do all this stuff. And it's like, I think my perfect world is a world in which like we all agree that like if like we all have the library books on the side of the street and no one takes them and like steals them so that like people can have books to read. But like I think that like I don't necessarily want to be like farming in the future either. So like wherever
Yeah,
the
farming.
is.
Turner, are you working on a piece of art there?
Oh, no, no, please don't. I'm just doodling while I listen.
Oh, okay, all right. What's your perfect, better future look like, Turner? And then I'm going to ask you, Marco. Then I'm going to ask you, Courtney.
Can you circle back to me?
Yes,
Sorry, I
Marco.
was just interrupted, so my brain's like a little scattered.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think probably probably the realistic answer is that I'll like try and make things work within this context that I'm living in. Like as I gain privilege over time, will probably participate in local politics more. But like what I think about on a daily basis is just like a microcosm of the ideal, which would be like some sort of like self-sufficient commune with a bunch of my fellow broke artists, leftist friends somewhere where we would like all have equal share in like a or something. Because I'm like,
Oh,
how
that's
is this, you
That
know?
goes to like living a life worth living, living in your means. That's your billionaire.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're just like I know so many people like in this exact boat, and we're all just like on the street of where I work retail, like there's consultants all along the block, and we're all like, when are we gonna pull the trigger, guys, and just like show them shit? Because it's so crazy. Like there's just I don't know, it's a weird time, but yeah, that's what I've been thinking about recently.
yeah, Courtney. What do you think about when you think about a good future for yourself and for your world politically?
I think that I always want to do social work. I would just like the need for social work to be different. I don't want to be on the defense. I don't want to constantly be scrambling to pick up the pieces that are falling apart because of the systems that are in place. And I want to actually be able to use it to make the world better, to make people happier, to make lives richer with happiness. And I know that sounds like sunshine and daisies, but
No, it's the
I'd rather
concept
it
that we
actually
talked
go to the
about.
people.
Remember when we talked about flourishing and we talked about that concept of
Yes,
eudaimonia that we get from the ancients? And flourishing
that's what I want.
doesn't necessarily mean pleasure. It means like the potential to realize, your to actualize your full potential.
Self-actualization. Yes, exactly. And I think that that's what I want. And like, I want to be drafting policies that enrich lives. I want to be making policies that are not, like I said, on the defense. They're not on the offense. Like, I want to be fighting for a 4-day work week. Like, fuck it. I want a 3-day work week. But you know what? Like,
Yeah,
I
no,
just,
like the idea
I
that activism isn't just damage control, you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is the future that I want. I want activism that is about, yes, flourishing. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's why I'm in school. That's why
It
I'm
gets you
going
up
down
every
this
day.
path. This is what gets me up every day.
Mhm.
This is like my literal purpose. So, and I do think that that's possible. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll get to see it, but I do think it's possible.
What do you think, Turner?
I would like a future in which people who disagree with what need to be done for society are able to talk about that in like a reasonable, rational way without opinions and egos getting in the way. Because that really seems to be the thing that's like stalling a lot of progress. And people are getting, people are just taking it to like, oh, I'm trying to think of my wording here.
So polarization
Yeah,
And-
polarization.
and villainizing the
The
opposition.
internalization of like of one's beliefs as being completely unchangeable and not like taking it as like, oh, have you considered like looking at this from another person's perspective? And people are just like, no, I would never do that. So I would like to
Yeah,
see
like
that.
the dogma of the entrenchedness of positioning right now, as
Mhm.
opposed to an openness of possibility and really listening to the opposition and trying to find some common ground. That seems very
Yeah. No, but then there is also with the common ground thing, there is the issue of like making compromises and half progresses that really don't do enough. So I also want to see like
And that
all
historically
people-
certain groups have had to compromise more than others. I
Yes.
think that's
yes.
really important to add to the conversation.
So
yeah, I mean, the common ground is so problematic. We need it, and yet it's an ideal that has never been realized in a way that is independent of power structures.
because it can be used
That's
to gain
a-
a leg up on someone, on your opponents.
Mhm.
It's yeah.
I was gonna say, Amber, like the power structure thing is, I think, also very important. Is that like, as much as I do love the anarchy of it all, like people can only do so much without like throwing their lives away to a certain extent as well. And I think like that falls into like why we can't build this utopia, because like people
And
aren't willing.
burnout.
Right.
Yeah. Like, so I talk about my partner all the time because I think they're so amazing. But we talk about this all the time, like where they're either surrounded by people that are feeling it or they're feeling it themselves that day, and it ranges day to day, but like at some point you get tired about hitting your head against a wall every single day, and like I haven't even started, I'm already jaded. So it's just I think that's another reason to full circle before we all go. Like that's why some of us are online, is because in a capitalist society, you don't have time or pieces of yourself that are yours. Like you are bought and owned, and your time, your life force is what is being paid for. It's not your work.
Yeah, maybe that's a good place to end for today. Oh my God, what a great
Maybe
conversation.
not. We should say something nice.
I think that was pretty, I think that your visions of alternatives is kind of like more hopeful than I generally hear from your generation. Maybe you offered those up because
I'm a romantic. Which is weird.
you've got Courtney, you've got a hard political edge in your thinking, but you're
But I'm
soft-hearted.
fluffy.
Yeah, but you're soft-hearted.
I'm gonna be a therapist. I plan on doing the macro work, but I know that I don't think anybody has it in them to do it full time for the rest of their lives. I think that I need a bread and butter, and that's going to be therapy and sex education and all the things that I'm obsessed with. And I think the macro work is like the life overarching goal, right?
Mhm.
So
I love your vision. Lowell, what are you thinking of in terms of what you will do for a vocation?
For a job.
Yeah.
It's great.
You know,
Okay.
that
Uh,
bad time to ask.
no, I think I'm gonna go into law just because that's kind of like the path that's like I'm being
do
guided
it. Oh my God, I could see it.
Well, your mom is
I
a
think-
very
Yeah,
successful
I think I have
lawyer.
the privilege of not necessarily going into big law. So
You've
like
got the Socratic questioning down.
so I might try to do some environmental civil rights-esque things, or immigration. I'm a big proponent for like no borders, you know what I mean? No walls, like let's do this. So probably something with that, but who knows? There's still time. But like I'm studying to be a lawyer. Philosophy is my major, then law school.
Yeah,
That's
right on.
awesome. Also,
Awesome.
borders are a social construct, so yes, go you.
1000%, I agree with that.
Marco, you envision a future as an artist.
Yeah, probably.
What's plan B? I think you told me the other day.
Oh, I don't even know what
Maybe you said
I
maybe
was
you
telling
might
Amber
end up
that
being a teacher, you told me.
yeah, no, I think well, that's like my ultimate unrealistic goal is to like teach glass blowing one day, and that
Oh,
would
I
be
don't think that's unrealistic.
it will
I think that's
require
beautiful, actually, and I don't think you should minimize it.
no,
Yeah.
I mean I think it's representative of like a lot of my values. It's like
Artists
everything.
get so much shit that, like, don't do it to yourself, you know?
Yeah, I was like um one of my friends who works at the same business I do, where like we have like terrible management, so it's like we're all just like suffering to sell this luxury skincare right now. But they're like they've been professionally trained in like couture sewing, and like I've been going over on Wednesday nights, like just like for a couple hours a week and helping them. And like the way we both conceptualize our work, like we're realizing more and more like why we're good collaborators too, is because it's like it's really like not about it is about aesthetics, but it's equally about like processes and like ideal ways that society would be positioned. Like that's like why they settled on couture and I settled on like glassblowing because they're like necessarily community oriented crafts. Like they require us to shift the cadence of our lives as well and like in some ways revert to more like ethical ways of living. Um, but yeah,
That's
like that. I
really
think
interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
that's like why I want to do art, though, not like just to make objects. You know, that both are important in certain ways, but
But you like the communal nature of the work. The process involves it's like something you kind of can't do on your own.
yeah, like that's why like me and my like favorite friends who are artists or whatever, like it's about materiality, but also like processes and like people.
Do the artist compound. Do
Yeah,
the artist
exactly right.
compound.
And Turner, you're thinking of a future in graphic design. That's right.
Yep. And I don't have unrealistic expectations. Like all graphic designers, the field is so oversaturated that all graphic designers start out as cogs in the machine. Like you
Is that
have to start
true?
working for a company and do
Is that what
boring
you
work.
hear?
It's an almost universal truth from professors and people in the field and students. However, graphic design also has an incredible potential to do like good work that people see, and I'm particularly interested in like designing for inclusion. So I hope to do that and maybe potentially become a graphic design professor, perhaps.
Yeah, I love that.
Because I like talking to people and connecting and teaching and that sort of thing. So there's probably going to be like a slope up towards what I want to do in graphic design, but I'm willing to get there.
It's a lifetime to pursue these dreams, and to have them is what gives life a kind of excitement and an energy. And I think like what I feel so really worried and scared about is how many students I talk to who just don't have a dream. Like the dream has kind of been, really deflated in their soul. And so, it's hopeful to hear you all aspiring to quality and flourishing and political engagement that's meaningful.
It's also not static. If you want to have hope for those people, like
Yeah, of course.
I think this sense of purpose I have is no more than 3 years old. Like I woke up one day and I was just like, fuck this.
When you were 3?
No, like 3 years ago.
Oh,
Like
3 years ago. I thought you said when you were 3 years old. I was like,
Oh
I
my
would not
God.
put that past you, Courtney.
No, I mean, who knows what my first word is, but I would not be surprised if it was fuck.
All right, you guys. Now, what I have down for 2 weeks for today is neurodiversity and mental health. Does that seem like a good topic for us?
Yay!
Okay.
I like that topic,
Sounds
obviously.
good. I'm so
Okay.
proud of all you guys. And I'm here for you if you need me. Anytime you need anything, please feel free to contact me. Have a great 2 weeks.
Okay, bye. What?
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.